Buster sets off for the most important journey of his life, to propose to the girl of his dreams. With the Navigator, Keaton had reached the peak of his career. Its success ensured his independence. He was known and loved all over the world, and he was rapidly becoming as wealthy as the millionaire he portrayed. Rejection was a theme which ran through many Keaton films, but at this period it was affecting his life. He was now the father of 2 boys, but Natalie kept him at a distance. She was spending at the rate of $900 a week, and that was just for clothes. They kept moving to more and more expensive homes, with money borrowed from Keaton's producer, Joseph Schenck. So when Schenck bought a story Keaton disliked, he felt obliged to do it. Buster has to marry by 7 o'clock to inherit a fortune. He'll try anybody. In desperation, Buster advertises for a bride. The response is alarming. Keaton directed this sequence with 500 women in the streets of Los Angeles. At the preview, the audience barely laughed. Keaton was dismayed. At last, something drew a belly laugh. Keaton examined the film to find out what.
Coming down the side of the hill, and there were some boulder rocks in that hill, and I hit one accidentally, sliding down that hill, on my feet most of the time. And I looked behind me in the scene, and here come 3 boulder rocks coming at me, bouncing down the hill with me, and I actually scrambled to get away from them.
The sequence faded out just as it was coming to life.
We went back, and for a finish, we built 1,500 rocks, starting from grapefruit size up to one was 8 foot in diameter. Well, I got in the middle of that rock chase, and it saved the picture for me.
Thanks to the rocks, Keaton topped the chase and dispersed the women.
The women in his films were terribly important as props, not so important as love interest. But his most beautiful leading lady he ever had was in Go West.
Go West, Seven Chances, and particularly Battling Butler made impressive sums of money for Joseph Schenck. And in 1926, Schenck gave Keaton the go-ahead for his most expensive and spectacular production, a film called The General.
More proud of that picture, I guess, than any picture I ever made, because I took an actual happening out of the Civil War, out of the history book, and I told it in detail, too. The Northerners coming in there as the civilians and stealing that engine with the intent of burning bridges behind them.
The look of the film was based on Civil War photographs of Matthew Brady. Keaton told his crew, "Make it so authentic it hurts." The location was Oregon. Southern railroads were too crowded.
We bought engines up there, and with very little work, remodeled them into Civil War engines. Then we built a passenger train and a freight train on their flat cars that they had the rolling stock for us. And all the track in the world we wanted to use was already laid for us.
To Cottage Grove came 17 carloads of equipment, much of it to create this set of Marietta, Georgia. As director, Keaton was in complete control. He recreated the period so carefully that for many modern audiences, this is the Civil War brought to life. The Northern Raiders steal Buster's train and kidnap his girl, Annabelle, with Buster in hot pursuit. But he needs something more powerful than a handcar. With another engine, he discovers it.
We found that as an actual gun of the Civil War, the first railroad gun, and we duplicated that cannon. It almost looks like a prop we invented. That's the only thing that kind of scared us when the company used it. It says everybody's going to say, "Oh, they invented the prop just for to get the gag."
The idea was to show Buster's attempts to shell the raiders on the move. Every shot had to be filmed on the move, too. But Keaton was a master of the traveling shot. Cameras were mounted on cars, themselves often mounted on railroad flat cars. This amateur film gives a rare glimpse of Keaton directing. 2 locomotives run side by side on double tracks, one pulling the camera train. The cannon has to fire its first round straight into the cab, a joke with real gunpowder.
He said, "The only thing that saved our lives in that was a pair of tweezers." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, the first time we loaded the cannon, we only wanted the cannonball to just go and land into the engine cab. And he says, the first time we did it was a good thing we was going around the curve, because it went whango and it missed the car completely and landed over in the field someplace. So then we put in a little bit less, and it still went too far." He said, "We finally wound up pushing the kernels of the gunpowder aside and just counting kernels into the thing. Finally got it so that when it went off, I..."
Desperate to stop the raiders, Buster uses a full barrel load of powder. There was no rush on a Keaton picture. He could relax between scenes, although he looks distinctly ill at ease here, posing with the amateur photographer's wife. But you had to play baseball to work with Keaton. He'd pick up a bat at the slightest excuse and in the most unlikely places. Working without a script, Keaton liked to shoot rehearsals, as Marion Mack discovered to her cost.
When I went out that morning, I was made up and all ready to work. And I didn't know that they were going to make a scene with the water spout aimed for me, that when the train would stop, they would let me have it. But they didn't tell me they're going to do this. So the scene you see in the movie, that was quite a surprise. And I was pretty angry about it. So I let him have it.
For the Battle of Rock River, Keaton used the Oregon National Guard.
We had to have artillery pieces, army saddles and stuff like that, and uniforms for both gray and blue. With 500 men up there, I could house them for a week and put them in gray uniforms and bring them going from right to left, and take them out, put them in blue uniforms, bring them going from left to right, and fought the war.
They issued no shoes. You had no shoes, but each guy was counted out with his uniform.
An 18-year-old private in the Oregon National Guard was John Wilson.
I do recall, though, that we had lots of caps, and we had, but the uniforms, we had about 200 of the gray and about 300 or so of the blue, and not enough to make distribution on it.
They treated us as like we were in a regular army. They had us come to attention and measure off our distance, and then they had us number off, and they gave us all our directions and what we were supposed to do, and expected us to carry it out.
The location was at Culp Creek, where a full-sized railroad bridge had been built, simply to be destroyed.
I felled the timber that made the bridge across the river, put the locomotive down. We was working for this contractor. George Potter had the job of putting the tree to build a bridge across the river that they used for that scene. 300 feet, 400 feet from here, we across the river, and it was built. They tried it out 3 or 4 times to put the locomotive across it so that they see how it worked before they cut it so it would fall in the creek. It was about 70 feet long across one bluff to the other.
As Jack Little's powder men laid the last of their dynamite, people came from Cottage Grove and all over the state.
I had the measles at the time, and I wasn't allowed out too much. And this was such a spectacular thing that my father says, you can't miss it. You can't miss it. It's just a one-shot deal. And so my mother decided to take me, spots and all, and I wasn't the only one with spots there either. It was quite an epidemic.
With the bridge alight, Keaton set in motion the most expensive single shot of the entire silent era. People in the crowd screamed. Someone was on that engine.
It had a white shirt, as well as I remember, and a vest, and his cap.
By enlarging the frame, we can see what alarmed the crowd.
One of the ladies fainted because this dummy leaned forward, and we all thought it looked like a real person in there. And when the train went down then, it had a whistle on it, a very shrill whistle. It was kind of a mournful thing, and everybody felt like something really had happened that was really dreadful.
The battle was covered by 6 cameras.
It was very exciting and a little bit alarming because there were shells going off and they had explosions going off, and they blew parts of trees to pieces, and the horses had riders on them that weren't the greatest riders in the world, and some of them were falling off, and I know it was kind of scary as far as I was concerned.
But the funny part, going down the hill, I happened to be a little bit in the rear, and they had stakes out there where they had smoke bombs or explosives of some kind, and someone had, I've forgotten how they designated who would die and who wouldn't, but somebody would fall with this stake, and he'd look at that stake and he'd crawl like the devil to get away from it.
There were some of them would be thrown off of the cannons, and the horses was running wild, and they'd get run over, and it was next thing to a war.
And they had it dammed at this end to make more water, and it was supposed to be wadeable, but it wasn't.
Water wasn't just knee deep, it went clear over my head. They said it was 18, 20 feet deep, the hole where I stepped into. And I swam. The water was much more of a river here. And I turned around, I swam right back out into the big hole. And there's where I went down 3 times.
I don't know how many of them almost drowned in there. We kept pulling them out for 10 minutes, I guess.
Keaton was ultimately responsible for everything that happened, but he shared the risks. 9 men had been injured, several by explosions.
One of them was too close to Buster Keaton, and it knocked him over and knocked him unconscious. And he lay there on the ground for quite some time unconscious. They finally brought him to, and he rested up a while and got back on the job.
Then the unbelievable happened. Like one Keaton climax topped by another, sparks from the engine set fire to tinder-dry forest. Every man was rushed to the scene.
And there was a lot of young fellows that was there that had no experience whatsoever in fighting a fire. Well, they thought all you had to do was just go up there and start in and fight it. And Buster himself, he took his pants off, and he was fresh with his pants.
He'd been fighting the fire with these pants while the rest of the men had been using their uniforms. So he would run around in long shorts with his back down. And at that time he had a pitchfork, and he was sneaking up on a little puff of smoke and putting it out. And of course everybody was just hilarious.
They got the fire out with no trouble, but there was so much smoke that they couldn't shoot. And they had to wait for a rain to come and clear out the smoke, when that could be up to 6 weeks or 7 weeks or whenever. So they had to pack the whole thing in and come back to LA and wait for a rain. And then when they finally got a rainstorm and that cleared the smoke out, then they went back up and finished the picture. So that drove the budget up considerably.
Keaton was already wildly over budget, but he had produced what he and his associates were convinced was his masterpiece. Modern audiences agree, but when the film opened in New York, reviews were mixed. A few were positive, but the New York Times said, "This is by no means as good as Mr. Keaton's previous efforts." Variety, "The General is far from funny." Life magazine, "Many of his gags are in gruesomely bad taste." Keaton's favorite picture did not cover its costs. Schenck insisted that in future he work with a production supervisor. The supervisor, Harry Brand, had a profound effect on Steamboat Bill Jr. Keaton was preparing to flood the Mississippi at his specially built location at Sacramento, California, when a real-life disaster intervened. Harry Brand had seen these newsreels of the real Mississippi floods and alerted Joe Schenck. Keaton was working with director Charles Reisner. He was almost ready to shoot.
I said, "I've already built my sets, and our gags are worked out." He says, "All I could do is change it to a cyclone, which will take a lot of rebuilding." I said, "Well, that's better. Do that."
They rebuilt. A dredger crane was used to tear buildings from their moorings. Aeroplane engines provided the cyclone. As Keaton became more enthusiastic about the idea, the gags became even more elaborate. Cables linked a light breakaway set to a cantilever. The slightest touch could lift it.
And then they had that famous scene where Buster is standing in the street, and the whole front of a building comes off and crashes down, and he's standing right under it. One of the most spectacular stunts ever done. Of course, it was very dangerous.
Ropes hauled the wall into position.
The whole front of the building was on a base plate and on hinges.
The ropes were cut simultaneously. Behind the window, you can just glimpse a man retreating after giving the set a final push.
It must have weighed 1,000 pounds, the damn thing. And if Buster was 6 inches out of position one way or the other, they would have driven him right into the ground like a little tent peg, you know. Poor Buster was gone, and my father, who was a very religious man, he had a lot of different religions, but at this time he happened to be a Christian Scientist, and he had a practitioner up there. And they were praying all day because here comes this shot, you know, and he couldn't, my father couldn't bear to see it. He and the practitioner were off praying in one corner, and you know, they had to wait until to find out whether Buster came through it or not. He was a game little guy, that Buster.
Just before Buster made the shot came news from Schenck that would mean the end of his creative freedom.
He had been arbitrarily turned over to MGM. He was having problems at home, one thing and another. And he had reached the point where he really didn't care that much.
MGM at Culver City, California, was the world's most prestigious studio when Keaton joined it in 1928. Morale was high after successes like Ben-Hur and The Big Parade. 52 pictures a year were turned out here under the leadership of two remarkable men, Irving Thalberg and Louis B. Mayer. In overall control was the president, Nicholas Schenck, Joe's brother, who owned a palatial estate in the East.
Mr. Schenck took me on a little tour of this marvelous estate that he now owned at Sands Point, Long Island. And we walked among the chicken coops that he had. There were a number of them. And he had a lot of very valuable chickens. And it seemed that they had all been in great fights with each other. And here among these white-feathered little chickens at times, you saw terrible bloodied bodies. And of course, it had an impression on me. Here's the president of the company telling me, Marx, take a lesson from that. It's only the tough chicken that survives. You've got to be prepared to kill the other man if necessary. And that must have been Mr. Schenck's philosophy.
His company was run like a corporate state with total control of production. The individual took second place to the team, and the director took second place to the producer. Of these top-flight directors filmed in 1925, more than half had resigned or been fired by 1928. It was in this environment that Keaton now had to work. Yet he had Eddie Sedgwick, an old vaudeville friend, as director, and he had several of his old crew. For his first film, he chose something close to his heart, the motion picture camera. It was the camera which had so mesmerized him when he first entered the movies. But at MGM, his films had to have a producer.
They were produced mainly by Larry Weingarten, who was a little more of a sophisticated producer of comedies, but I think he was lost in the Buster Keaton pictures.
The Cameraman became one of Keaton's favorite films. He played a street photographer with a tintype camera. A ticker tape parade sweeps past. With it come the newsreel cameramen.
I saw the Hearst Weekly man and a script girl with him that I got one look at and fell hook, line, and sinker. Well, immediately, I went down and sold my tintype thing to a second-hand dealer and bought a second-hand motion picture camera. And, of course, I got one of the oldest models there was. Well, I set out to be a newsreel cameraman. And, of course, I had my problem.
One of the main problems was the script. Keaton had never had to work to a script before, and this one was far too complicated, even if it did have escape clauses. And working on location in New York was hopeless. Crowds gathered wherever Keaton stopped. He cut the script and New York to the bone.
And they got up at 5 o'clock on a Sunday morning and did what few street scenes they could get. And then they packed it in and came back here at the studio and finished the picture here.
On the back lot of MGM, Keaton staged a Tong War in Chinatown. Keaton made use of all the resources of MGM. The studio even provided an elevator for one of his finest sequences. Buster's been waiting all morning for his girl to telephone. The tremendous success of The Cameraman proved to the company not that Keaton was right, but that they were. They insisted his next picture had to be scripted and budgeted more tightly. Most of his crew went on to other pictures, on top of which his marriage was in trouble. Since the arrival of their second son, relations had been strained between Buster and Natalie. Buster had now fallen for another woman, Dorothy Sebastian, the star of his new film, Spite Marriage. Keaton played Elmer, who loves an actress from afar, but is too shy to admit it. Elmer achieves his dream when he's given a part in the play. Keaton wanted to do the film as a talkie. MGM released it as a silent, with this track of music and occasional sound effects. Despite front office interference, Spite Marriage had the Keaton touch, for the last time. At the end of the play, Elmer is required to kiss the heroine, the object of his love. One of the rules at MGM prevented their stars taking risks.
He would do falls, stepping up on a table and falling on his face. My God, you'd think that he was, all the bones in his body would be broken. And I told, my goodness, I said, you won't be able to play baseball. He says, I'm only practicing and I'm rehearsing.
Filming aboard his yacht for Spite Marriage, Keaton indulged in some risky stunt work. It was the last time as far as the front office was concerned.
Yes, he could do the acrobatic stuff because they knew he was capable of it, but no, they wouldn't let him do anything else if there was anything concerned with horses or automobiles or anything like that that entailed any danger. They wouldn't let him do that.
Enlarging the frame shows that this stunt was done not by Keaton, but by stuntman Bobby Rose. MGM were now ready for sound, but not ready for Keaton. It took them a year to find a subject they considered suitable.
Start out breezy. You let your elbows slag, you let your footsies drag, just like you had a jacket's free and easy. Brave men, slave men, one foot in the grave men, grab yourself a partner now. Show girls, slow girls, never had a full girls, here's your only chance, and how, if you please it. While the music plays, you can dance for days to this lazy race, free and
The actual of getting into sound didn't bother him at all because he had a good baritone voice, no stutter, no lisp, no problem. So the fact of speaking or singing or anything like that, there's no problem. He'd done it all his life.
It must be you who haunts me night and day, like the strain of a...
The problem was not the voice, but the character. MGM tried to change it. They made him a sad clown, appealing to sympathy. The one thing he'd never done. Keaton began to sense the hopelessness of his situation.
New York stage directors, New York writers, dialogue writers, and musicians union all moved to Hollywood. So the minute they start laying out a script, they're looking for those funny lines, puns, little jokes, anything else.
Oh, woe is me, the queen has wings.
Everybody at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer was in my gag department.
Didn't I take my hat off right? You took it, but you got the lines all mixed up.
They'd laugh their heads off at dialogue written by all your new writers. Are joke happy.
The queen has swooned. Say it after me. The queen has swooned. Say it after me.
They don't look for the action. They're looking for funny things to say. And my fight with Thalberg at MGM was to lay out a script with me the same as you always did. Because as soon as our plot is set and everything is going smooth, I'm always going to find places in my story where dialogue is not called for. So you get those stretches in your picture of 6, 7, 8, 9 minutes where there isn't a word of dialogue. Well, in those, we get our old routines.
Louis B. Mayer insisted that in all matters the producer's word be final. Irving Thalberg admired Keaton, but expected him to work to a script prepared by his scenario department.
They'd have 6, 8, 10 writers on it, and everybody had to put their foot in the pie. And it just got to the point where he couldn't get any work done that he thought was quality because there was too many people interfering.
You're not nervous, Mr. Butts, are you?
No, I feel all right.
That's fine, because, you know, this is your first big scene, and there's one thing I want you to remember. Never, never look in the camera when anybody speaks to you. Wait for the reaction and answer them. If a piece of scenery or a prop should fall on you during the action, keep right on going as if nothing happened. You know, it costs a barrel of dough to line up and shoot it over again. If you forget your lines, say anything funny. It's a comic opera. Remember the queen, respect her. Remember the little girl, like her. Remember Bobo, fear him. Remember the king.
They were picking stories and material without consulting me, and I couldn't argue them out of it. I'd only argue about so far and then let it go.
You're not nervous, are you, Mr. Butts?
He wouldn't make a lot of noise about it. He just walk off the set and say, I'll see it what time tomorrow. Walk off the set and everybody say, uh-oh, something's going on.
The company sent angry telegrams. Keaton's absences were costly. But now he'd lost creative control, they were his only weapon. He'd also started drinking. Thalberg encouraged him to take Natalie on a European vacation. The trip did not bring them together.
Oh, but acting, I'm afraid. Just a feller from Kansas. There's no experience. Romance, dashing.
Listen, I'll let you in on a secret. I'm from Kansas myself.
You're from Kansas? Abilene. Soy solamente un muchacho de Kansas.
Oiga, te voy a decir un secreto. Yo también soy de Kansas.
De Kansas?
De Abileno.
In those days, they made a Spanish version, a German version, and once in a while, an Italian version of all of those films. and a French version also of Oz, which meant they would make the film in English, get it totally cut, edited down to size, and they would go back and reshoot the exact scene for scene with an Italian cast, a German cast, a Spanish, and Buster had to learn to read phonetically all his speeches off of a blackboard, off camera and everything, which meant he was making each film 4 or 5 times.
French versions were directed by Claude Autant-Lara.
And I say, it's maybe very good for America, but this picture doesn't mean anything for Frenchmen. I don't think they laugh at that picture. So he said, what do you think? I said, you must change this, so and so, and give him a little detail. And he said, go ahead.
But Autant-Lara was told to shoot the script as written.
When I came back after lunch, I saw they put a moviola on the set. And from that minute, I had to see the scene of the American picture that as it has been shot in an American version, and to copy it exactly in French. And I said, Buster, what can I do? I said, my boy, we're here to obey. If you don't obey, you'll be fired.
Keaton disliked his next script, Sidewalks of New York, but he had to obey orders or face suspension. One of its 2 directors was Jules White, who just graduated from making comedies with dogs.
I knew before the camera was put up for the first scene that it was practically impossible to get a good motion picture out of it. Absolutely impossible.
Yet the picture grossed more than any of his other films, to Keaton's dismay. What chance had he now with MGM? That Christmas, the usual publicity pictures were especially poignant. It was to be Keaton's last with the family he loved so much. New Year 1932 brought an ominous development. The company teamed him with a New York nightclub comedian, Jimmy Durante. Keaton immediately took a back seat.
Well, how are you, Professor? For the love of Mike, how did you get here?
Keaton's fight against incessant talk was lost once Durante entered the scene.
I'm glad to see you. I'll see you after the show.
But MGM argued that he'd missed the point.
Jimmy, being co-starred with him, was an attempt to make a team that would presumably go through the roof as a great comedy team.
We're a hit. It's stupendous. Come on back, Professor, and give the folks a kick. A kick?
Although I also liked Jimmy Durante, he was a totally different caliber of comedian. He had very little class, so to speak, but that was part of his class, that he had no class. And it pained me at times to see some of the movies I had to go to as a preview of their new feature pictures.
From their first film together, Keaton was unhappy.
Good morning, gents. Fine weather for this kind of stuff. Fine weather.
And then, of course, when you give me a Jimmy Durante just can't not keep quiet. He's going to talk no matter what when the thunder happens. You can't direct him any other way.
Glad to meet you. This is Mr. Elmer Turtle.
Tuttle.
This is the gentleman who is to be shot.
The one thing Keaton wanted was the one thing the studio couldn't give him, his independence. He gave in to a deep depression.
He became progressively more unhappy as time went on, until finally he had now had a breakup of his marriage.
What hurt him most was the loss of his 2 boys who'd been close to him. Natalie changed their name from Keaton to Talmadge. Keaton was now an alcoholic. He'd lost everything but his salary, and he spent that at the gambling table.
Well, Buster seemed very unhappy after Natalie divorced him. They were very much in love, but I think Buster drank too much, and Natalie just wouldn't have it.
I got to the stage where I didn't give a darn whether school kept or not, and then I started drinking too much, and then when I found out that they could write stories and material better than I could anyway, it was just me fighting with them. Well, of course, it took about 2 bad pictures in a row to just put skids under you. Oh, everything happened.
so many kinds of alcoholics. My God, I was married to one. And I'm an alcoholic myself. I'm a drunk. I love to get drunk. I mean, there's all kinds of alcoholics. And Bus was the kind that couldn't drink. After he had 2 drinks, he didn't know what the hell he was doing. And he'd keep on drinking, and then they'd put him in one of those places, you know. Gaelic cure, that's where they give you all, you know, just keep pouring it into you for you, thinking you'll get sick of it. And it could kill you. It killed several people that I know about.
At one of these cures, Keaton met a nurse, May Scribbins. They were married in January 1933. Keaton couldn't remember. He was in an alcoholic haze.
You could see it on the screen the last 2 or 3 films.
Why, Ellen, what you're keeping something from me.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
No, you
are keeping something from me. Come on, now, tell me. What are you doing in this brewery?
Make beer. Would you like some?
Yes, I'd like some.
I'll give you all you want for nothing. But don't tell my partners.
If you add it all up, I would say that Buster drank out of loneliness. Although he was with people, he was a lonely individual. And the deadpan reflected that in more ways than one.
I think Buster became an alcoholic because he was very disappointed inwardly of the way his career was being bounced around.
Have you anything to say in your defense?
Yes. We've got something to say. What did we do to be molested like this? What did we do? It's persecution. That's what it is. Unadulterated persecution. And let me tell you something. We're unprotected citizens. And from New York to California and also the Great Lakes. You won't find 2 men so entreated. And if you think that the people of this community... Quiet.
On release, exhibitors made their own comment. Even the cartoons had them inseparable. Keaton was now living aboard his land yacht. Natalie had sold his ocean-going yacht. It was equipped with bunks and run like a ship. When he chose to work, he lived in the MGM car park.
The trailer was moved to the far western side of the MGM studio, and it was a place of constant parties, and finally Mayer had it drawn to his attention. Now, Mayer was a highly moral man, no matter what people may say about him, and he did not want what could be a potential scandal erupting within the studio lot because they were having a lot of girls show up. There was a tremendous lot of drinking, and there was probably some gambling. And so consequently, Mayer sent Eddie Mannix, who was a studio manager, to go down there and stop all the carousing. But unfortunately, Mannix was one who joined in half the time. So it was not exactly the right thing to send a firebug to put out a fire. And after Mayer realized that Eddie wasn't getting anywhere, he went down himself, and he had a tremendous confrontation there with Buster.
L.B. Mayer hated Keaton, and Keaton always said that L.B. Mayer was the worst enemy he had at the studio.
He finally reached a point where Buster ordered him out of the trailer, and Mayer ordered him out of the studio. And that was the final exit of Buster Keaton as far as into the production of movies at the studio. And I always thought that Buster had a wonderful exit line because he said, "You studio people warp my character," which was literally true, of course. He couldn't make the kind of movies he wanted to make.
Buster Keaton was only 37 years old.
I suppose we loved him almost as much as any actor I can think of. Buster was one of the real greats, not only in his own field, but as a guy to work with and be with. Naturally, when a man is easy to work with and has great skill and great understanding, you think he's one of the greatest guys in the world, and he was.
At the end of The Cameraman, Buster is fired by MGM News and returns to his humble tintype. But his girl tells him they've just seen his work, and it's wonderful. It took 30 years for the same thing to happen to Buster Keaton. But when his silent films were seen by a new generation, he was hailed at last as a screen genius.